Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Probably don't need this mic, but we are recording so that people can watch later, so we're going to go ahead and use the mics. I'm going to hand things over to our lovely panelists. Thanks so much for being here today in just a moment, but I do want to let you know that we've got some books to be checked out. You can take them back through to check out. They will beep at you, but it's okay. And then we also have some native plant seeds over there, so you can help yourself to those. Those we purchased from Courtney at Native Lands with an Elizabeth Schultz Environmental Fund grant from the DCCF. So, yay, thank you so much. And so, without further ado, I'll just let the panelists introduce themselves and get started.
Well, welcome everyone, friends, new friends, friends-to-be who appreciate prairie plants and seeds. We've kind of done this routine before, so it's kind of just a panel dialogue. If you have a burning question, please raise your hand, but we'll get to questions at the end. Also, can everyone hear me okay? Where she said we're taping this, 'cause sometimes people like to play it back or catch a species note or whatever. I think we'll start by introducing ourselves, and Courtney, why don't you start first?
Sure. My name is Courtney Masterson. I'm an ecologist and executive director of Native Lands Restoration Collaborative. We're a nonprofit that does ecosystem restoration with community focus and community building aspects. So we work with people like yourselves a lot.
I'm Kindscher. I'm a professor up at KU in environmental studies and work at the Kansas Biological Survey. I'm an ethnobotanist and prairie plant ecologist enthusiast by trade. I'm really excited because my new edition of Edible Wild Plants is almost hot off the press. I think they're arriving tomorrow. I'm going to do a public event Wednesday night at the Depot at 7:30 if you're interested. But the new edition has more information and more pictures, so I'm really happy about that.
And I'm Frank Norman, a plant ecologist, botanist, herbalist, professional wetland scientist. I founded Norman Ecological Consulting, LLC, back in '07. And I worked for Burns McDonnell, Black & Veatch, Applied Ecological Services, and been in the field for a while. So that's probably good enough.
Maybe a little show of hands from the crowd. How many of you are familiar with prairie plants? How many of you have them in a garden or planted them somewhere? Great.
Just pretend if you don't. I didn't know. Yeah.
Scientific names? Do you guys know scientific names pretty well? We'll try to stay with common names and mention some scientific names if that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. What else? Anything else I know?
I know there's 2 new people to Kansas here. Anybody move here from somewhere else? So a different ecosystem? Yeah, me too, actually. A long time ago, but me too. I wasn't born on the prairie. So there's a lot to learn. It's a complex ecosystem. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about plants and seeds. A fun thing. What's your favorite plant, Courtney?
Dude, they're all of them. I love them all. I always say that my favorite native plant is Salvia azurea, or blue sage, or pitcher sage. It's one of my favorite plants to eat. It's the host plant to my favorite native bee, and they're beautiful. They're still blooming. That rain helped a little bit.
It's a hard question. I can never answer it well without hesitating. I guess elderberry might be my favorite.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Everything, that plant should be in everybody's apothecary, herbal apothecary, because every part of the plant is medicinal. And we may need its medicines as the days go by. So.
Yeah.
I guess I follow in a similar theme. My favorite plant's Echinacea. Any of the species for that matter, although I'm really fond of our most local species, Echinacea pallida, the pale leaf, kind of drooping flowered one, which does really well in gardens and plantings here. But most people are familiar with the little bit broader leafed one, Echinacea purpurea. All of them are great medicine, immune stimulants. I encourage people to dose on Echinacea tincture this time of year, seasonal change, added stress. As I tell students in my ethnobotany class, if you know you've got stress coming up, such as exams, visiting the parents, or expecting to break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, you might want to dose ahead of time.
Or all of them. Yeah. Because we're on theme of seeds a little bit today, I actually get my echinacea medicine from echinacea seeds. I don't even try that hard. They just fall into my hand. They're wonderful. They make your mouth numb and your throat, which is nice.
I'm actually doing a funded project with a company that's wanting to extract oils from echinacea seeds for medicine, for cosmetics, for other things. So. Let's talk about seeds. Yeah, so what's the importance of seeds in all this native plant work, business, restoration, plantings?
I think they're foundational to all of the work that we're doing, whether it's gardening or restoring landscapes or, like you said, furthering medicines and other human, products for us. It all starts with seeds, and it's a very complex topic, more than you'd think. Very complex.
It does seem fundamental. I mean, and I think the easiest way for us to get native plants back on the landscape is seeds. It's not the only way, but it's a relatively easy way with some species and not so much with others. And then seeds are fundamental, right? That's the little genetic bits that propagate and grow and become something that's kind of amazing.
And it's not a simple topic either, because there's a lot of, let's just say, prairie seeds out there that are not local per se. When I put my prairie in 20, nearly 30 years ago, I had seed from Sharp Brothers, which is out in Healy, Kansas, which is in western Kansas, and their seed source was, it's hard to remember, but some of it was cultivars and not local.
Yeah, they still sell Colorado seeds,
Mostly,
Washington
mostly
seeds.
cultivars.
And I don't get seed from them anymore. I get some from Five Brothers. They're out in McFarland, and I don't know if all theirs is local either.
No,
So,
but they're nice people. But
yeah, and so now I try to get it local.
Yeah.
Mostly collecting myself. So it's, when you don't have any sources back in the day, use what you got.
yeah.
Let me add to seed woes. I mentioned this echinacea experiment, so we decided we would use local genotype where we could. So we got Echinacea pallida, Echinacea angustifolia from western Kansas, and Echinacea purpurea from Missouri. And we decided we'd have a couple controls, so we ordered Magnus Echinacea purpurea, which is kind of the leading purpurea variety. Just a nice big flowered purple broad-petaled thing. And we planted those out, the Echinacea Magnus, and we got all sorts of colors. We got white and yellow and orange.
I saw that. I wondered what you were doing.
Beautiful. But for our experiment, we wanted to have a defined variety, and the problem is that there's only one Echinacea species that's not purple, and of course that's Echinacea paradoxa, because the paradox is how can you have a yellow flowered purple coneflower, right? Mm-hmm. So there's been breeding work that's made these new cardan varieties, and so we had gotten this mix, so now we've got a real problem. We've got species mixed. Mm-hmm. So I tell this story because I think it just helps illustrate the importance of knowing your seed source, and really the only way you know your seed source is for it to be local, and either yourself or others, such as a group of us, have collected that seed.
Yeah, I think we used the word cultivar and didn't really define it, so we can talk about that. But I think origin of the seeds should be something we're all thinking about, whether it's for your garden, because the origin of the seeds can affect how animals might visit those plants, but also for those of us who are creating larger landscapes or sharing seeds for broader projects, there's all sorts of funky variables to think about. Hybridization, and whether it affects the success of the plant in the long term, if it's serving the ecosystem the way that it should. We plant native to provide for everyone. And so when we get these funky genetics mixed in, it complicates things.
So how do you know what species you're getting if you're going out to collect seed?
Right. Well, yeah, and Jake has a question. That's a good question. Please.
How do you know they're not good?
How,
Are there people who are actually studying, like entomologists, whether a certain plant will visit a native and not a non-native, or visit a non-native and get deleterious results?
yeah, those are huge questions, and that's a big question. I know there's some efforts, especially in the New England area, like Doug Talamy's labs are doing that, and he's not alone. He just gets a lot of lip service. Great person, but he's the most famous person doing that work. But there's folks throughout the country looking at the effects of cultivated native plants and whether or not they're providing the same resources. We're still early in that research. I don't think we have the answers. And when you're not sure, I always say, why risk it? If you don't know, then use the native species, because we know they've been in community with wildlife here for thousands of years, so that's easy.
I think the data would indicate that your native species are probably a better fit. Clearly, for all of us who garden, you have lots of wonderful pollinators that visit your garden on non-native species, so there's benefit from that. But if you want to be on time and know that you're providing resources right now, I think one should, if you're trying to feed the pollinators, one should really think about the native genotype and local seed as much as possible.
Yeah, the genetics of the seed affect everything from when it blooms to what color the flowers will be, and every variable you can think of, the size of the leaves.
Frank, I'll put this back on you. So how do you know, if you're collecting seed, what species that is that you're collecting?
Oh, what species?
Yeah.
Because I already know what species it is.
So
How do you
he
know
visits
that?
them many times.
Am I
You're-
supposed to believe you?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
man. Big ask there.
Well, maybe sometimes, but
Well,
it's-
yeah.
it's experience. You pal around. You use. Way back when, I was using weed books and floras and trying to identify that way. There wasn't a lot of picture books. There wasn't a lot of additional information like there is now. And you also pal around with people that are trained to do that and know it better. So it's just experience and also passion and working hard at identifying things, and use your local whomever. The herbarium has some incredible people there, and I've been using them for decades. If I need something, I need.
The problem is that, like, we're doing seed collection today, but to identify most species we're collecting today, and you look at picture books, you get something in flower, may have a description, but it's just harder to tell. I highly recommend Seek as identifying something in flower. It really does pretty well here. Not perfect, but pretty good. But again, in flower, it's really much harder this time of year. We all, I think 3 of us have a pretty good gestalt, even on plants this time of year, and can tell generally our asters apart. Those sort of things are more difficult this time of year. And that comes through training and recognition. I flag and tie flagging to lots of plants. If there's something you want to collect and the seeds won't get ripe until the fall, mark it. That's really, if you see it in flower and you can recognize it, do mark it. That's helpful.
I think the best way, my skill set developed over 15 years of visiting the same plants, the same prairies, the same landscapes over and over and over again. I know where the Monarda grows in this prairie, and I know exactly where it is. And experience tells me when it'll be mature. Marking really rare things is important, so you can learn what they look like every day of the year. Most importantly, probably getting permission to do that. Kansas is number 2 or number 1 in the least amount of publicly accessible land in the country. So you really should have permission, even roadside. We're not supposed to do that. Some of us do, some of us.
Collecting seed?
You shouldn't be taking from roadsides. That's not your land. So it's good to have permission, but also you should essentially be staking out species that you know you want seeds of all year. You may not know when those seeds mature. There's some data becoming more available, but writing a seed identification and collecting book is on my lifelong to-do list. I hope to
Please
get
do
to
it.
Yeah.
What question?
Well, I was just thinking about your question, Kelly, and I was just thinking about cross-pollination
Mhm.
and what you think you know. What happens? What does cross-pollination do to a seed, and how do you know?
Yeah, it's
Depends.
easy if you got different colored things, right? And color's kind of more manipulative than other things. I've done a lot of work on echinacea, so I can speak about it quite a bit. There is evidence of gene flow from cultivated white flowered echinaceas into our wild types. So we know that even things we plant in the garden may be crossing into the wild. And it makes sense. Our pollinators are not staying in town and not staying in the country or not staying, in close locales. So we are getting some mixing whether we want it or not.
Right.
And we really know very little about the full implications of that.
And there's just also, if you ever looked at the glossary in a botany book, in a flora, it's thick. And there's just a lot of, and the reason it's thick, the reason there's so many terms is because there's morphological variation. And, the same species may have different, have you ever looked at, what is it called? Butterfly milkweed has a variation of flower color, and you assume it's the same species. It hasn't altered much, and I'm just gonna collect it, and I'm not gonna worry about genetic change and crossover and all that stuff. I'm not smart enough, and
You're
I don't.
smart enough. You're smart enough.
Not with genetics. I never did well with genetics, and I just collect it. If it's something that's aberrant, I won't,
Yeah.
because that's the way it's going to be. We're in a fast changing world, and things are going to mix.
I'd add to that. I think it's better for us to get seeds out on the ground. Try to do as much local genotype as you can. But if we want to feed pollinators, for instance, get seeds out there.
Right. I mean, we can't all rely on the less than 1% of prairie that's left in our region to provide seeds for all of us. But at the same time, exercising caution and knowing where your seeds came from, to have from a trusted source that you feel is providing you a true native species so that it doesn't muddy the waters of what you're trying to do. Echinaceas are really easy to tell apart if you've been staking them out. If they're hybrids, the pollen color changes, the leaf morphology changes. So it's really easy for me to say, I know that pale purple coneflower and that glade coneflower have hybridized because the pollen is this color in these new seeds. But that's because I spend all my time doing this. I don't expect people to do that. And my job is to provide seeds to the community. So I'm very particular about my seeds and the genetics in my planted spaces, whereas other folks can enjoy those hybrids, and maybe it's not a big deal in your garden.
So starting back with you, so what are some of the easier species to work with in terms of collecting seed and saving seed?
So many. But, echinaceas are really easy because they actually hang on to their seeds for quite some time. The native mints are probably the easiest things to grow, and that includes blue sage. But, bee balms and slender mountain mints, they hold on to their seeds for a very long time. They're very easy to germinate. They don't require any special care compared to the other native species that could need, wild roses need 3 winters to germinate. That's not something I expect the average gardener to put up with. But bee balm, I could grow any day of the year. It doesn't need anything from me, just a little bit of dirt, a little bit of water.
What about annual forbs too, wildflower?
Oh yeah, black-eyed Susans and the biennials and the annuals. Partridge pea. I'm trying to remember, Therese, what we did in the garden, in the seed catalog this year for.
We do have partridge pea, not here, but
And senna.
yeah, we have wild senna over there.
Yeah.
Echinacea.
Mm-hmm.
Plains coreopsis.
Yeah, plains coreopsis is easy. So the legumes and the mints are two that are super easy to grow. Legumes, you just have to get through that thick seed coat, which is just fun. And then mints, you don't have to do anything. So we do have some options for folks who are just getting started with native gardening.
Just kind of crude, but bigger seeds are easier to collect and do well. And a thumbnail or knife test on any seed you collect to see if there's white endosperm. Not that that tells on everything, but if you do see that, you've probably got viable seed. Unfortunately, a lot of us, myself included, have collected a lot of dead seed over the years. Some plants are particularly difficult that way. I think a lead plant. I really think now that a lot of times I thought I had good seed, I didn't, that it just doesn't mature. I think a problem with seed collection is native species, especially perennials, really don't need a lot of seed to perpetuate themselves. They live many years, so they only need a few seeds. Or maybe they don't need seed every year, so they don't produce a lot of seed, or it's not always viable.
Yeah.
So I got a question about just, we're going through a drought. Of course, it's going to end on, when is it, Wednesday?
Wednesday night.
Well, maybe
Hopefully.
partially, but yeah, I know.
Too late.
Ruined.
I've been wondering while I've been collecting seed, whether there's any, if you have seen this, any difference with viability, or maybe not even viability. Well, I'll just say viability of seeds and, let's just say, prairie forbs, prairie plants during a drought and during a good season,
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah, there's a lot less seed produced in a year like this. Greater concern to me weather-wise, I guess to be more accurate climate-wise, is the shift in season and how it affects whether pollinators find flowers at the right time of year, like they have for many thousands of years. So we've had greater issues with the heavy spring rains that seem to never stop, and the spring species not being pollinated because the pollinators can't get to them. Long droughts that either reduce the success of the pollinator populations, or plants, especially perennial plants, are choosing not to invest in flowers or as many flowers.
I think it's remarkable. I've planted a few plugs of New Jersey tea, and New England aster, and it spread on the other side of the driveway and then on the other side of some woods, and it's still producing seed, and they look like they're viable. Same with the other asters, hairy aster, and what's the one? What's Symphytrichum subulatum? What's that one?
Salt marsh.
Yeah, salt marsh, aster, and just a number of them, and they're all producing flower. They look like they're not affected at all, and the seeds look okay. I didn't do a taste test or anything like that. Just remarkable how tough they are when there's no moisture around. Where
That
are they
makes sense
getting?
for fall species because they
It is pretty
follow.
amazing.
Yeah,
Where are they getting the moisture? It's not around.
Yeah, it is pretty
from the
amazing.
hot steam coming out of
Deeper rooted, that's right. Yep. And they're just tough plants, right? I mean,
They
they've evolved with this.
Yep.
We do have some flexibility. We get concerned about seasons changing and climate change, but we've always had droughts. So in this year, you probably noticed some things flowered a little later or kept blooming later because there wasn't enough moisture for them to kind of fully mature, but they still bloomed. They just were a little slower. So there is some variability in flowering time, thank goodness.
Yeah.
So we're all keen on collecting seeds this time of year, and it's a great thing to do. But in terms of seed collection, it seems like seeds that I've collected or I know that you have or for sale or that we've all used are heavily oriented towards these fall species. So reflect on that. Why don't we have more spring things?
There's so many variables that go into that, obviously, but probably I think of our spring species as our most threatened species. Most of the prairie that's left over doesn't have a ton of spring wildflowers in it, and then we're seeing obviously these shifts in weather patterns that affect the success of those species. Many of them take a long time to start producing flowers, or we talk about prairie turnips a lot, right? One of the most beautiful spring wildflowers, but its range is I mean, there's hardly any left. So it's difficult to collect them. It's difficult to find a place to collect them. The pollinators are having issues with pollinating them. And then they tend to require different sorts of care to germinate and grow successfully than our summer and fall species do. So they're just harder all around, but they're worth it.
I agree. How many of you know the regal fritillary butterfly? Anybody know that one? It's a gorgeous big butterfly like monarchs, really, really rare, almost threatened. Some states have listed it. It feeds on prairie violets. That's its food for caterpillars, which are the divided leaf violets. And so we had a little project where we thought, oh, let's see if we could, get some of those. And a colleague in Iowa State had propagated the butterflies by growing the plants at Walnut Creek National Wildlife Refuge and outside of Des Moines a ways. And then they moved pregnant butterflies into tents, and they laid eggs and it worked. So I just thought we'd do something like that. So I made a bigger effort to try to collect violet seeds. Whew.
That's hard.
Really, really hard because, well, they're tiny, and by the time the seeds start to get ripe in those little capsules, the prairie's grown up.
The ones that grow in my yard, are they not?
They're not.
Those seeds are easy. I mean, they just open up and there's thousands of them.
Other fritillaries will use those, though. They're still valuable. But yeah, the prairie violets are unique.
Yeah,
Yeah, please give them love because they're serving a really important purpose. Yeah.
they are important too.
Yeah.
But
How could you not love a violet?
Well,
Come
I
on.
see people all the time who don't like them. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's so strange. Great medicine, great plant, beautiful flower.
yeah, for some reason, the regal fritillaries don't come into town in our yards, and apparently they can use some of those violets, but prefer the prairie violet. So worked really hard to collect. Then I realized it was going to be easier to propagate the violet by doing cuttings. So we actually took cuttings off of plants, and the little rhizomes, you can actually cut them in the wild and plant them, and they'll grow if you take care of them. And it brings up another little topic for me is that in addition to seeds, there are other ways of propagating things.
Right. Pros and
Make it-
cons both ways.
And a lot of things are easier to move as a tuber or as an offset or as a cutting. I mean, even things like spiderworts in your garden root really easily if you take cuttings of the stems and make sure the node is moist and has opportunity to sprout. So there are other ways of propagating things too.
We focused heavily on prairie violets this year as well, but it's because we had burned our remnant that we get to hover over all the time. And it's a lot easier after a burn to collect violets. And they produced much longer this year than they normally do. For about 3 months, they were producing flowers and seeds, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Normally have a tiny window.
And curiously, they will sometimes bloom in the fall on a hay meadow.
Maybe we'll get lucky with all this rain. Oh yeah, we had fritillaries. We didn't have monarchs this spring. They finally showed up a few weeks ago, and it felt like it was too late, and they really needed to just keep moving. But they hung around a little bit. We didn't have any caterpillars really this year, hardly any monarchs this spring. But like Frank was saying, the asters bloomed, the goldenrods bloomed, but it felt like their bloom time was very short because of the drought and the dust, and just everything was against them this year.
So Frank, what plants do you like to plant by seed in terms of prairie restorations?
Well, whatever's available in my, I guess, in my prairies that I have and the remnant prairies I go to. What have I been collecting? Well, just the regular stuff. Gray-headed coneflower, echinacea, pallida. What are the other ones? Any of the prairie grasses. I really like side oats grama because I think that is a really good starting plant for restorations. I think it germinates pretty well and it can spread pretty well. I really like, I call it hippie hawkweed.
Hairy hawkweed.
Hairy hawkweed. That's a fun one.
It's awesome.
At the guest prairie, it was all over the place, and I was able to grab a bunch of that. Indian plantain I got there. I've really been liking is it Eastern Bricklebush, Cunha eupatorioides? I don't, they change, the taxonomists change the names all the time because.
False bone sets.
Yeah. That's a fun one. It looks really cool right now with all of its seeds.
Fluff, white, puffy
Yeah.
fluff.
Yeah, they're beautiful
There-
winter
it
interest for
It
gardeners.
goes on and on, you
Yeah.
know, I haven't collected not Indian plantain, Indian paintbrush. I know it has seeds.
That's a tough one because of its parasitism
Yeah,
to
I
get
haven't
going.
collected that in years, but I threw some seeds out in my prairie, and it's been coming back for at least over a decade, for sure. So that's a fun one, too, if you can find it.
And twisting this a little bit for you, besides the common things, which we're having difficulty naming all of them,
Oh,
what things
there's
do you
thousands.
what do you take pride in terms of successfully getting from seed?
Oh my gosh, there's so many great things. Let's see, what did I grow successfully this year that made me happy? Well, pawpaws. I know we're jumping off the bandwagon, the prairie bandwagon, but I've had increasing success with pawpaw germination, which is, if you do this, then you know that that's a tough one.
And you probably have some of the mamas in the back.
I've got
back of the
mamas,
hoop
I got
house, right?
baby pawpaws, I got all the, anyway, I've got all the, we've had, my personal focus is on trying to grow native foods and medicines to share with the community, but also things that you can't buy commercially. One of our big successes this year was foldwing dicliptera, which is a woodland wildflower that blooms in the fall. I don't know anywhere you can get it, and we found a really nice population at Emporia State University, and we're collaborating with them on some restoration along the Neosho River, and found a huge population, and it was gorgeous. Didn't seem to mind the drought at all this year, and I thought, this is a direction I need to go, and it bloomed for a very long time. They almost look like a salvia, but they're. It's called foldwing dicliptera is the genus. They are absolutely gorgeous, and that's one I'll be including in woodland restorations from now on because I've broken the code on how to get them going. But yeah, there's an awful lot. I'm fascinated with hard to grow plants.
So one hard to grow that, again, is not from seed, but I've been really keen on.
What about Mead's milkweed? Didn't you worked on a project with folks in Manhattan to germinate a bunch of Mead's milkweed, and we all planted it down at what's the name of the preserve?
Anderson
Prairie
County?
Preserve.
Yeah.
Oh,
And they actually grew.
Yes,
That's impressive.
we've been able to propagate them. It takes tremendous amount of effort, and really a 3-year-old plant is about how big you need to get them
Yeah.
to be
And
successful.
they're spindly. They look like they're going to die in a moment's notice.
And you have to take care of them for a while. Really, really tough.
If you're uninitiated, that's our endangered species,
Thank
act
you.
protected milkweed here in Kansas.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. One I like promoting is often known as the ground nut. I like now calling it hopness, but
Yeah.
it's this tuber, Apios is genus. And of course, it's the Ka name was toe or dough, and Topeka is a good place to grow dough, which means some people interpret it as wild potato. Some people think it means a good place to grow potatoes, but it's not Irish or big potatoes. It's
Right.
the wild potato. I'm excited about it because it is good food, and it has these wonderful purple chocolate flowers
They're beautiful.
that you can
That-
get to vine up
yeah.
something.
They
but-
do not grow, they don't have wonderful seeds, really.
Many of them don't make seed.
No.
Many of them are triploids and are seedless, which again shows that probably the main way they've been propagated, and which I encourage all of us to propagate them as humans, is by humans, moving tubers around. And they like wet soil, so the river valley outside of Topeka, around Lawrence and everywhere, had these all over the place. But they got grazed out, and almost all of our floodplains have been tilled or farmed. So they're now uncommon species, but historically, I now think they may have been the primary carbohydrate source of Native Americans before corn.
It's really fun to go digging for them because they're fairly shallow, and they do produce a lot of tubers. So that's how we propagate that species, Apios americana. Really gorgeous floral display, despite the fact that they seem to not care to produce seeds.
Yeah.
Genetically, many can't, but they're absolutely gorgeous. Yeah.
And when you say wet soil, you don't mean wetland soil. You mean occasionally gets flooded, probably, but not anything with
More like riparian.
not permanent
Yeah.
moisture or saturated
Not,
soils
yeah, not
very often.
generally standing water, but can be flooded, can be. Tubers are also tolerant of being flooded.
And it's not a wetland species. So.
Nope.
No.
Wet prairie would be the habitat I would.
Yeah.
So what else? How do you know when seeds are ripe?
Oh my God.
How do you judge that?
That's a huge question. That's probably the most common question I get is this
And
this the
By
seed?
species, obviously.
Yeah. Is this the seed? Is it ripe? What do I do with it now? Every species is different. I mean, we've got, 2,200 species in Kansas, and they probably all have a different story. But I think, just generally speaking, a few weeks after they've finished blooming is pretty safe. What part of the plant is the seed? The part below the flower. I mean, to oversimplify. The more time you spend with a species, the easier it'll be to identify these different parts of their anatomy. But echinaceas are easy. Anything in the aster family seems to be fairly easy for people to pick up on. It's those seeds with itty bitty tiny, or plants with little tiny seeds, or really rare species like gentians. People just have no idea what a gentian seed looks like. They look very weird. Or wild ginger seeds that have meat stuck to them so that animals will move them around. Those really rare species are probably the ones that are hardest. Things like echinacea or asters, the celery or parsley family. Usually the stem, when the plant stops caring for that portion of the plant, the stem will die back and then the seeds are ready to go. Once it stops nursing the seeds, I say just don't collect it while it's green. Then you're probably
Dried out stems, really a good indicator. And then you need to make sure they're not dispersing,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
echinacea just sitting there is fine, but then goldfinch like them,
Yeah,
or
lots of
wind
animals.
and things, and they start dispersing, so you have
Random
a
Courtney's
window.
walking by, jamming echinacea seeds in her
Window.
face. Yeah. Yeah, Frank. No, well, it's an oversimplification because there's seeds that if you wait till it's brown, they're gone. There's seeds that will never turn brown. There's plants that you can't propagate from seeds, really, like the potato. So that we oversimplify, but the vast majority of species, it's when the plant's dry. Yeah.
And I like to, when I do plant walks, and on my land I've got sunflowers and I've got silphiums, compass plant. No, I can't remember the other two. Rosinweed, and what's the other one? Cup plant. And then the sunflowers, and this is in the fall, and some people don't know all about the compositae or the sunflower family, and some of the seeds are fertile in the inside of the flower. The disc florets are fertile. That would be the regular sunflower that we eat the sunflower seeds in, and then the silphiums, they have seeds around the edge that are in the ray florets or ray flowers that are fertile, and they produce the seeds, and they look entirely different. And it's just fun to show people the variation in the seeds and the flowers, and it's just fun. It's a fun thing.
I keep talking about echinacea, but if you think of what you think of typically as echinacea petals, each of those petals is actually a flower. They're sterile, but if you pluck that flower and look at the base of it, you'll actually see a little stigma sticking out. But they're sterile, whereas the rosinweed or compass plant, it's the opposite. The center part doesn't make seed, it's the actual, what we perceive as petals that make seeds. Pretty fascinating.
Shirley?
A bigger question that might be out of the scope of the conversation, but I have to ask. I just read a book by Diana Beresford Kroger.
Say the name again?
Diana Beresford Kroger.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. She's really cool. She's super passionate. She's an independent scientist, and she's written several books. And this latest one, she's about to turn 80, and she is talking about forests. And here we are in the middle of the prairie, and at the edge of the eastern old-growth forest. She's championing how important trees are to the climate and
Yeah.
Where is she from?
She's in Ontario.
Well, that's the problem. She's Canadian. But we just need to ignore people from Canada.
No.
Sorry, Kelly. I took.
I'll start and let you both chime in. But yeah, I mean, I do think that trees are appropriate, especially, I mean, if we're in town and you want shade and we have lawns, we have spaces, we all should be planting trees, you know. But if you want open space for either a garden or other uses, and if you want prairie, you know, we should do that. And where there are prairies or adjacent prairies, we should maintain those habitats. Those habitats have great value. There's still an ongoing debate about, you know, if you were going to pick like one type of vegetation type to, you know, restore the world by getting carbon stores, what would you plant? It is somewhat, you know, adapted to your climate, but yet, and it's really confusing on who produces the most carbon over time. Definitely prairies and prairie plants are known to produce great carbon stores because of the extensive root system and root hairs that die and replenish each year. There's often been a debate about how in Kansas and the Great Plains we have such great soils. And there's two things, one of which we're blessed with great soils. They blew around and blew in. But the other part of that is it was prairie plants, the grasses in particular, with roots dying every year, replenishing every year, that have built up those carbon stores in the soil. So our prairie soils are much richer than most forest soils. But most of our forests are also on rock and don't have that same environmental history that we're blessed with here. Post-glaciation, wind-blown material, all that was beneficial. So I look more at habitat, and I'd say, where are we talking about? If we're talking anything in town, really getting some more trees is a good thing. If you're talking riparian areas, it could be either, but obviously there's a forest edge that really makes a lot of sense. If we're talking out in the county and someone's got property, I would definitely be encouraging prairie plantings. But it's context specific, I think.
I think I would generally agree with you. What ecosystem makes sense there? Is it rich, fairly moist or medium moisture soil? Are there other trees there that you'd like to keep? Do you have structures or parking to shade? You know, what are your values there? Most of this county, most of this region was prairie. If you're upland, if it's dry, if you'd have to water that tree every day for 5 years to make it live there, I don't think that's the right choice. Putting that much energy, trying to force an ecosystem where it doesn't belong is irrational to me, at the very least.
Habitat management's a piece of the puzzle too. If it's an area that's already being encroached with woody species, even if they're undesirable, that's probably a place to plant more trees because the energy expended on clearing or trying to bring it back with fire is daunting.
And the three of us went to the Natural Areas Conference in Manhattan a couple weeks ago, and some of the conclusions there in the cons of prairie is that they can't stop woody encroachment. And the one thing they could do is foliar spray from planes, maybe drones might stop the woodies, but they're going to come back. There's some that are just well established. Rough-leaf dogwood, everybody knows rough-leaf dogwood. What are some of the others? Plums and different trees.
Junipers.
Junipers. That's going to be the face of the world as we go on. This is a really rapidly changing environment that we live in, and we're going to be seeing things that we've never seen before. Some of you younger ones will see even more. So it's hard. It's hard to decide. You put a prairie in, you've got to burn it. You've got to keep the woodies out. You've got to reseed. There's a lot of energy put into that, and a lot of herbicide, a lot of pesticide. It's just really, really difficult to figure it out.
Comment on that too a little bit. I mean, one of the things we have done is we've changed the landscape. So, native people set fires. There were natural fires. A lot of fires occurred with 40, 50 mile per hour winds. We just don't allow that anymore. We also have trees that have tree seed, undesirable shrubs that have seeds. So we now talking about seeds. You know, a prairie planting is not typically isolated, or even managing the flint hill is not isolated. There's all this tree seed getting out in the prairie. We've changed the context that way. And frankly, I'm not keen on grazing. Grazing has been...
Frankly?
What?
Frankly?
I said frankly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kelly Lee is harder to say.
Yes. Is really bad for encouraging woodies because the hoof action actually encourages exposed soil,
Lots of
tree
extra
seeds.
nutrients, all kinds of
Yeah.
stuff.
So
Yeah.
problematic.
You know, I always say fence rows and fragmentation are how we got to where we are. And, you know, if you manage a fence, you know what fences and trees are like. It's a constant battle. And the smaller the prairies are, the more surrounded they are by fences and woodlands, the harder you have to work to keep it.
I do like haying. I like, seeing things cut once a year. You don't have the woody problems if you can mow something once a year.
Yeah, and 500 years ago, you could light a prairie on the west side of Topeka, and it would burn all the way to here. If the weather is if the winds are favorable, et cetera, totally different story back then. And yeah, so it's a crazy time for sure.
We should open this up for more questions. So we can keep rattling on. We
Yeah.
enjoy that.
Only easy questions, okay?
Oh, Jake, that's okay.
It's only sort of tangential to gathering seeds, but you talked about which plants are hard, and that made me think about how many prairie plants are or might be symbiotic with fungi in the soil.
Mhm.
So I don't really have a question, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. Native lands, when we build prairies now and beyond, really, we are lucky to work with mycologists who have been developing inoculations for restorations. But even your gardens, it's really affordable. You can buy Kansas, soil fungi to add to your gardens, and one bag's enough for your whole neighborhood. But I think they're really important, and the research is showing these fungal relationships amongst many other things. We were a little bit dipped into hemiparasitism when we talked about Indian paintbrush, but there's so many complex relationships we don't understand, and that could be contributing to our inability to germinate these seeds or to keep the plants alive, like Mead's milkweed after a few years. What does it need? We don't know.
Yeah, we talk about restoration, and really most times with prairies we're talking about reclamation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're planting prairie seeds in a former crop field where essentially you killed off most of the good fungi, soil organisms, not all of them. A true restoration would be taking a degraded prairie pasture and bringing the wildflowers back. That would be restoring it. And in that case, you have most of those native organisms underground. By the way, we can't even identify most of them. Jim Beaver in his lab at KU is the kind of leading, probably international, at least prairie and open site researchers on these soil microbes. They even have a library now of them that they're maintaining where they grow them out for research purposes. Those are named, but most species aren't even identified, let alone do we really know what they're doing. But there is good data now that shows that if you inoculate prairie plants, especially the more kind of difficult ones, the showy plants we like, plant them out, they will grow better, survive better, do better. So we know those microorganisms indeed do help.
Well, it's interesting that there's so much more research being done now, but when I worked at Applied Ecological Services, this is back in the early 2000s, the city, I guess it was City of Lenexa, was a little more forward thinking, and anytime you were going to do a restoration, you had to put in inoculants, mycorrhizae,
I didn't know that.
and other things, and that was way before any of this. And I don't know how well it worked, but they were thinking about it, and then I think it sort of died away. They ended up and I don't know why I didn't keep up with it, but they ended up not requiring that anymore. And I think maybe it's back in the mix a little bit. But,
You make me think as I'm making a pitch here. Because we know our native soils are so high in carbon, we really need to have a campaign nationally to protect native soils. No matter if they're prairies, forests, wetlands, name the vegetation type. We have all these microorganisms that we know have value. We have all that carbon stored that if you start tilling that or disturbing it, you lose that carbon store. So that kind of needs to be the fundamental piece of looking at our carbon future, is protecting what we have in the ground.
or burning too hot fires
Yeah.
can burn the soil, and you lose a lot of carbon that way, or burning at the wrong time. You know, you had mentioned that you couldn't collect, less spring ephemerals in some of the prairies, and I'm thinking that might have to do with burning too late in the spring.
Absolutely.
The
There's
Flint
lots of
Hills,
things that
they
contribute to
they always burn in the spring, and they burn when the tallgrass prairie, what is it? Big blue stem is maybe this tall, and they, the stems have just started and they burn. That's what they've been doing for decades, and they're not going to stop. And that hasn't been good to the spring ephemerals either.
Yeah, the combination of then having these spring ephemerals, particularly like in the Flint Hills, all the Flint Hills fire, all the spring burning. So you damage them, then they emerge, and then they're double stocking most of that acreage, so it's having a disproportionate effect on spring wildflowers.
Right.
Which is why we don't see hardly any spring wildflowers in grazed lands.
Because they're yummy. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every decision we make in caring for the land, whether it's your garden or your acreage, has an impact on how it grows.
And sometimes unintended consequences. That might be my favorite phrase these days. I think we do prairie management, woodland management, ecosystem management. I think we've been making mistakes for decades, and maybe just because you can burn doesn't mean you should burn. And just because it needs to be burned or it's overgrown with woodies doesn't mean you should burn. So what is the right formula? I don't know. I'm still struggling with that after doing this since the early 90s.
Management's hard.
Yeah.
Doesn't get down to it.
Yeah.
And then applying it to what most of us will be working with at tiny landscapes. Applying those concepts we use for large landscapes to a tiny space is confusing. So that's part of what today's all about, so we can help people get through some of that. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the importance of seed collection and seed saving to biodiversity? And
Yeah.
can you tell us about your seed vault?
Oh, yeah. Yes, so the question was, can we talk about seed collection as it relates to biodiversity, and also talk about the seed vault? Do you two want to take on the first question, and then I can wrap up with the seed vault stuff?
Sure. I mean, we talk about these rare species, and even locally, our prairie wildflowers are really rare if you really looked at it that way. How do we get them back? Well, we're talking about planting them, but if we want to make sure that we have really good biodiversity, we need to make sure we get the wilder, less common species, and to get those in enough numbers, we need to be actively focused on collecting the full range of biodiversity. Of course, the big question always is, what's the value of biodiversity? And it's really hard to answer in a direct way, but we do delight in seeing more butterflies, more pollinators, more species. We know they have values which we can't even articulate fully. I see it just part of our caring for the world scenario, that we know it's right to do, and we need to do that. Part of God's creation, if you want to look at it that way. So it's harder to articulate a scientific basis for the value of all biodiversity, but we know that's important, and we know we're losing it. So we need to reverse that, and seed collections and seed storage are a fundamental piece of that.
Yeah. I would add, people have been collecting seeds as part of our culture, as part of our food, medicine, our relationship to the land for as long as there's been people, really. As soon as we recognized how our animal friends were using seeds, we followed suit. And caring for seeds, carrying them, sharing them is a big part of who we are as a species. And I believe very firmly that it is our job to help to care for the land, that humans have always been land stewards, and protecting seeds is part of that work. It's a big part of that work, and it's a really big part of knowing our plant friends. So, you know, all collectors, whether you're collecting Beanie Babies or seeds, are always after the rare seeds. So I tend to talk about the rare things that make me happy, but every native seed has the capacity to give to our animal friends, to us, to care for the land, anchor soil, filter water, and they're miraculous, and they're all unique. Some of them I can't store for more than 6 months because they'll die. Some of them, like compass plant, I could store for 100 years and it would still germinate. And the complexity of that is fascinating to me. It's also just something I'm deeply passionate about. But I think it's because it's primal. I think it's built into who we are. Anybody who comes out and collects seeds, like hopefully many of you will come and do today with us, you find yourself lost in the joy of it and the community of it. And the seed vault that I help protect with our organization, Native Lands, is a storage space, a climate-controlled storage space, where we gather seeds from native landscapes and native gardens. People donate native seeds so that we can then turn them right back out to community projects where they'll benefit all of us. So we store several thousand pounds of native seeds in there, representing, you know, over 100 species. Every year it changes. So our seed collection is in full gear right now. And there's lots of opportunities to come out with us on really cool landscapes. Kansas Land Trust has partnered with us to allow us access for seed collection on private land that most folks don't get to visit. But also, you know, Hobbs Park and many native gardens around town are sources of seeds that we provide to the Lawrence Public Library for free for the community, through the Caw Valley Seed Fair, which if it's not on your calendar, it should be. It's the third Saturday in February this year. There's a lot of ways to connect with native seeds, but there's also a lot of ways to contribute to that effort.
I look at collecting seed as a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think a lot of my ancestors may have done it. I also think of being an herbalist, and maybe no one in my family for several generations collected herbs and stuff, but some old great grandma with gray hair back in England or maybe Belarus collected plants, and so it's in my genetics, it's in my history, and same with collecting seeds. And everyone here has that same type of ancestry, unless you just had a really, well, I'm not going to go there. I just know it and know that that's true. And it's just incredibly empowering to me that my ancestors did this, collected seeds, collected herbs, killed deer or killed whatever they needed to, and probably said a prayer, and we're very, very grateful, all that good stuff. Nothing negative here. And so anytime you collect seed, you're carrying on a tradition of your lineage, and it's very, 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 very special.
I appreciate all of that. And it makes me think about, it's also carrying the lineage of this place. We have no distinction here in this region, the prairie region, of people and prairie. They really co-evolved here. When Native Americans came in this region, they came in because the glaciers were retreating, and it was at that time that prairies were here. And they were managed, in a sense, because Native people set fires. So there's always been this human relations here that has ensured that there's prairies. And so it's also a function of our place.
Well said. The prairie's never been without people. And we've never been here without it, but we're getting close. That's what the work is now. The work is now, our prairie is going away. What can we do to stop it? And that's what this work's all about. And it's not just prairie, obviously. I'm oversimplifying. We had beautiful woodlands and wetlands and savannas, and those are also very important.
We have wetlands here?
We have one or two.
Savannas?
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, frankly.
I know
We
we
should
have
wrap it up here.
a bit
if
of an
any time
agenda,
wise.
but any questions or anything that, Therese?
Yeah, please, go.
So, let's pretend you have really crappy soil around your house and it is October and there's only been 2 days of rain in the last
Yeah.
couple of months.
Yep.
Big one coming up, a good rain.
Yeah.
But beyond that, what's a how-to or what to do right now to basically prepare your soil to take in new seeds and to help to build that better soil biodiversity?
That's a really good question.
Crappy soil, no topsoil, just clay. Is that what you're saying?
Or maybe it has a mix of bluegrass and care knotweeds and
Care not weeds, is that what you call them? I love weeds.
Well, yeah. You know, if I was going to, most native seeds you're going to want to put down over the winter. So whatever you can do now to clear the site of the undesired vegetation to reduce the competition for your seedlings is a good thing. I tend to smother things out with whatever materials I have available. Usually we're using, cardboard or plastic that I have laying around and then I pull it up. You don't need to build up organic nutrients in the soil. Native species are not benefited by that for the most part. Weeds are.
If you're afraid your seeds would run off at sloping or something, you might want a little straw or again, material just to hold some things in place. But
Yeah.
you generally want to reduce your competition for getting seeds on the soil.
you guys have the most favorite smothering technique? I mean, I've heard the cardboard and then a few inches of
Everybody's different. Yeah. There's pros and cons to everything. I feel like I've been in community discussions where people really worry about cardboard and leaching chemicals from cardboard. Those chemicals, for the most part, will disappear by the time your plants are something you would eat or use for medicine. It takes 2 or 3 years usually before they're large enough for that kind of use.
Yeah.
I don't recommend tilling because your soil tends to leave right along with your seeds. If you're smothering grass, the dead grass that's there, when you lift whatever it is up, leave it. It'll trap your seeds in place. That'll act like your straw or your hay. If you don't have anything there, then use a straw or
It
hay.
also depends on the size you're talking about. You could camp out, every night every night. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that was a joke. But no, it depends on the size too. If it's small, maybe you could rototill it.
A lot of people cut sod off, or
Do what?
cut the sod off
Yeah.
with sod cutters.
So much as is very site specific, right? Do you have shade? What is true nature of that soil? So everything's a little bit site specific, and then I would treat something, you're talking more of a lawn space, I would do that differently than I would if it was the back 40, so to speak, where I probably had just cut things down and scatter a lot of seed and manage from there. But if it's something close to your house and you want it to be more attractive by someone else's standards,
Or even your own standards.
yeah.
but I wonder is there I think about the quantity, like basically you're hoping that if you're throwing down a lot of seed, that it will eventually overtake the grass seed that somebody tried to put there and it didn't, whatever. So do you have to double it? Is there a point where the returns are not worth the, or sorry, the rewards?
Yes, all of that.
Yeah,
all of
I
that's
mean,
true.
I caution folks not to worry about perfection, because unless you're going to be out there micromanaging every single plant that grows there, you're gonna be disappointed. Site prep is the most important part, and native plants, for the most part, will not outcompete non-native plants. So you really need to reduce.
If you've got a decent amount of fescue or broom or bluegrass, if
sorry.
it's pretty thick, you're going to have difficulty getting things to grow by seed. So you need to reduce that competition probably first.
So you're
And then
talking-
if the competition's reduced, then seeds will have much better chance.
That's now.
Now,
Honestly, if everybody gave their site a year before they ever planted into it, I'd be happy. But we don't work on that time scale as people. We like instant gratification. But.
So you talking about a lawn that you want to, how large of a lawn?
In different pots around 6,000 square feet.
Okay.
We
You could start small too, just a
little at a
little bit.
time, and then you have your own seed being produced that you can shift over. But we've been working with Cotton's Hardware. They've been helping us get native lawn seeds out to the community, and they sell a bag of native shortgrass that we've been recommending people use in town. It's like side oats and blue grama and short native warm season grasses that anchor soil, but they're bunch grasses, so they leave space for wildflowers. But if you clear your existing undesired plants, put the native grass down first, then you can add flowers as plugs later.
A matter of like, that sounds like an interim solution to basically bring nitrogen back in or whatever. So like, would you recommend like stepping up with something like a native grass or a clover or whatever?
I wouldn't put clover anywhere personally. That's my personal perspective, because they're very aggressive, and native plants don't do well in a bed of clover. But nitrogen is builds up with the plant's natural cycle. They'll drop their material there and build up nitrogen in the soil for you. It all takes time. Ecosystems are built in decades.
You actually don't want nitrogen. So you don't
Yeah.
want the clover. And,
Yeah.
and if it's slightly nitrogen-starved soil, the prairie plants
We'll do.
fend for themselves
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, carbon to nitrogen ratio in a remnant prairie might be 13 to 1 or higher. So you have very little nitrogen, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you don't want to do any. You
No
don't wanna-
nitrogen. I
you're-
don't
you're-
add any fertilizer for prairie plantings. No, I mean, whatever's there is plenty. And you're just favoring weeds if you add anything, yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna hop
Yeah.
in here. In case anyone doesn't know, we are meeting at the Little House at Hobbs Park. So our panelists here are gonna guide us in some seed collection. So you'll get a chance to ask them more questions then if you'd like. So please join us and
Hobbs
join
Park
me in.
address is,
It's between 11th
Delaware
and
and-
12th on Delaware. If you don't know where it is, feel free to come ask me.
And your mapping app
Yes.
will take you to Hobbs
And-
Park. There is a parking lot there, so don't worry.
And where's the
Yeah.
house relative to the ballpark?
just
I don't
north
know
of the
that house.
ballpark.
It's
There's
right
a
there,
ballpark
yeah.
on the corner, right, in East Lawrence. And just north of that is this
okay.
stone, really small
Okay.
stone building in the gardens between the two.
So are you putting native stuff around each along the base,
That would be cool, but no,
at each base and the home plate?
no, but that'd
Oh,
be cool.
yeah.
That's good.
Good.
That's good.
So please join me in thanking our panelists for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.